Okay, hi everybody. I want to briefly, and this time for reals, briefly go over just a few key points on bureaucracy. Don't want to make up a minute-for-minute class on this one, but try and give you a little bit of information that might help direct your reading a little bit. So let me pull out some of my notes real quick. The Bureaucracy is chapter 11. I'll put up a PowerPoint that has a lot of information on it that is in the book and will be covered, and some information that's not in the book, and I'll try and work through some of that. But the putting these videos and this information online is going a lot slower than I wanted it to in this hotel room. I'm still having one video load right now as I do this. Anyway, okay. Bureaucracy. The bureaucracy is essentially it's located in the executive branch. When we talk about government bureaucracies, we're talking about the agencies, the departments, things like that, that do the work of government. United States Postal Service is a type of government bureaucracy. It's a private corporation or a government corporation bureaucracy. The EPA is a government bureaucracy. It has a regulatory function. They're regulatory bureaucracies. They're social service bureaucracies. As I said, the private business / corporate, separate corporate bureaucracies, things like that. Anything you do in America is influenced or is allowed to have had happened because of a government bureaucracy and a government bureaucrat. There's a nice little beginning here in the book where it talks about on a typical day, a college student might check the weather forecast, drive on the interstate highway, mail a rent check, drink from a public water fountain, check the calories on the side of a yogurt container, attend a class, log on to the internet, meet a relative at the airport. This is a ridiculously crazy day for a college student. This is not a typical day for a college student at all. That would be terrible. This is a terrible day. This book is wrong. Anyway, the point is, all those things are made possible because of government bureaucracies. The National Weather Service, government bureaucracy, does the weather forecasting. You got the Department of Transportation, government bureaucracy, which keeps up the highways. You got the drinking fountains, water. The water is clean and drinkable because of the EPA, Postal Service, government bureaucracy. The FDA does the calories on the side of the whatchamajigger, yogurt pack, the airplanes moving around. That is made possible by the Federal Aviation Administration, government bureaucracy. Every single facet of your life is made possible by government. Hooray! So that's one thing to keep in mind with government bureaucracies. Now, embedded in there, this, I don't know what that motion is stuff like, alluded to, EPA and clean water. That's how do we get clean water via the EPA? Well, there's a piece of legislation, the Clean Water Act, which allows the EPA to regulate what people can dump into the water, what is considered safe water for drinking, what processes municipalities need to implement to be able to send water to people so that they can then drink it. This is an agency that has a regulatory function, a bureaucratic agency that has a regulatory function. it makes rules. Rules is an important concept that we'll come to in a moment, but let me make sure I'm not skipping anything on that part yet. Very odd. Okay. Yeah, that's right. So those bureaucracies do all those functions, and they exist to do those functions and to do them efficiently. Government bureaucracies make things more efficient. They help specialize work so that experts are doing things, not idiots. I don't mean idiots, I mean non-experts. Because they have specialized tasks, they can sort of get into the flow, momentum, routine of doing things right now. So the AP reading, one of the ways it's structured is you got 4 questions, essay questions. Each were split up, the whole 750 of us that are reading these AP exams are split up into 4 groups. Each group answers 1 question. So I'm answering question 3 on the exam, or on the test. I'm only answering question 3 and not taking a booklet and answering 1, 2, 3, and 4. Why? Because if I specialize in answering question 3, I can get really answering. Pretend, and whenever I said answering, grading, I say grading. If I can get really good at grading question 3, I can get through more tests and I can get through them faster. Whereas if my mind will constantly be in how to grade question 3, over and over and over again. Whereas if I were to open up a book, read question 1, and then grade question 1, I'd have to learn a whole rubric for how to grade that question 1. And then I'd have to open up question 2, learn the rubric on how to grade question 2, and then do that, 3, and then do the same thing with 4. So that's 4 things I have to learn instead of just 1. Okay? And every single time that I move from question 1 to question 2, it would slow me down because my brain would have to sort of switch modes. Remember, bring up a new set of facts, and all of that kind of thing slows you down. Whereas reading question 3 and grading it, put it aside, question 3 again, grade it, put it aside. My brain doesn't have to sort of discard that information and then bring in new information, discard that information, and then sort of reload into my memory bank, my surface memory, how to grade question 3. I hope that makes sense. Kind of. It's more efficient if you're not having to constantly throw something away, then bring it back, then throw it away, then bring it back. If you can just keep it there the whole time so that you can move through something more efficiently, you can move through something more efficiently. Kind of the same thing with the government bureaucracy and specialization. Instead of having one person do 10 things, you have 10 people, one person doing 10 things, but 10 people doing 10 things, all those 10 different things. You have one person, you have 10 people, but one person does only one of the 10 things. And if you do that, you can make it go faster. I might not be doing the math right. Maybe you get the point. I think you do. Think of it as assembly line work with Henry Ford and the Model T. One person's constantly screwing in the bolt and it's moving down the assembly line. Okay. So that's super important. the size of the federal government, the size of the federal bureaucracy has not grown anytime recently. People like to talk about the overblown federal budget, the large and sprawling federal bureaucracy, things like that. The fact of the matter is that the government bureaucracy has shrunk since 1980 and Ronald Reagan. There's a nice little whatchamajigger here. 338 and 339. There and there. So what those show is, the percentage of employees out of all the employees in the country, people who are employed, the number are employed by the federal government. You see that number, the percentage of federal government employees, has decreased as a percentage of, in relation to the number of employees in the country overall. The spending that the federal government does as a percentage of GDP, which is the right way to measure that. Remember, we talked about how $9 is not a lot of money, but $9 out of $10 is a lot of money, right? Because that's 90% of the total amount of money you have. But $14 trillion is a lot of money. But if you're comparing $14 trillion against $17 trillion, that $14 trillion is not as much compared to the $17 trillion as $9 is compared to $10. You can just think about it as converting it to a percentage point. 90% versus 8, 6, 60 to 70%, somewhere in that range. Maybe. Yeah. Okay, hope that makes sense. So the federal government budget, or the amount of money the federal government spends, will just rise. Generally, it'll just rise every year. The thing that also happens, though, is our gross domestic product rises every year. That's the thing that we measure the budget against to see if it's actually going up or going down. And we find that the percentage of government spending is either stayed the same or decreased. In general, its trend has been downward. It has increased in the past couple of years, but that's as a consequence of the recession. The underlying part of it, though, is downward. Okay, so 3 things bureaucracies do. I want to make sure I get them in the right order in the book here, so that'll help. Y'all, instead of me doing it in my own order. Okay, so we talked about bureaucracy specializing in areas, having experts in certain areas. One role the bureaucracies serve is they make government more efficient. All right. Another role that the bureaucracies serve or do is they can, or they are often given power by Congress to interpret and enact laws passed by Congress, to set up the specifics in a law passed by Congress. Okay, so I'll say Congress will do this for 2 reasons first, and then give you an example of maybe what I mean. Congress will delegate essentially some of its legislative authority to a government bureaucracy, to the executive branch. Okay, because one, Congress isn't the expert on much of anything. they have general policy ideas, but when it comes to enacting the specifics of a policy idea, they are not experts at doing it. It's better to leave the individual decisions that actually sort of flesh out the law to the experts. Otherwise, you might get some really weird and terrible laws. The other thing is that conditions in the world change a lot. They change rapidly. Quicker, generally, than Congress can keep up. Giving bureaucracies a sort of wide range of authority, delegating to them certain sort of legislative powers, allows the laws made by Congress to last longer than they ordinarily would have if they were made very specific, because the bureaucracy can change the laws or interpret the laws in different ways as the times change. One other thing the bureaucracy does, or that Congress passes off to the bureaucracy, is oftentimes Congress gives the bureaucratic sort of people the authority to make the very difficult political decisions, so that the people in Congress don't have to do that. And then, when the bureaucratic agents make the difficult decisions, the politicians in Congress can blame the bureaucrats for all the problems in the world, even though the people in Congress are the ones that set it up. Okay, so here's a specific example of what I mean with all this. Okay, so take the Clean Air Act. It's designed to make sure the Clean Air Act, it's designed to make sure the air is clean, right? Right. I'm very glad y'all answered that call. Do you think anybody in Congress knows exactly what it would mean to have clean air? Like, what is safe? What does clean air mean? What is safe? What is technically feasible and safe? So, I mean, we have lots of cars and coal-fired power plants in this country. That's not making the air clean. However, conceivably, there is some amount of that emission from power plants and cars and stuff that we can release into the atmosphere, and it would be considered acceptably safe. But where is that level? What different chemicals or pollutants should we be looking out for? These things are things that Congress does not know. So what they'll do is they'll pass that decision and those specific rules off to the bureaucratic agency, in this case the EPA, to make those decisions for them. So Congress could pass a law that says we direct the EPA to make sure the air is clean. What we mean by clean air is that the air will not have more than 1 part per million of CO2 in the atmosphere. The air will not have any more than 3 parts per million of CFCs in the atmosphere. There will be no more than 5 gigatons of sulfuric acid released into the atmosphere every month. All power plants more than 75 years old must be shut down to ensure the protection. You know, they could go through this list of all these very specific actions that need to be taken. They would have the total authority to do that, and the EPA would follow it out. That's not what Congress does, though. That would take a freaking long amount of time for Congress to do that. People would get pissed off because all of a sudden now they're being directly affected by this law. Hey, the Clean Air Act, it sounds great. But then if the Clean Air Act starts listing specific things like shutting down all coal power plants that are more than 75 years old, if you own some coal power plants that are more than 75 years old, you're going to start going, hey, I don't actually like clean air as much as I thought I did. So something Congress. So Congress doesn't list out all that stuff. All right, what Congress will say, what Congress will do, a law that Congress would pass would be something like this: the Clean Air Act. We give the EPA the authority to regulate all pollutants that enter into the atmosphere from any source, from any, human-caused mobile source of cars, planes, whatever, in mobile source power plants, as a byproduct of some other waste facility, and we authorize the EPA to establish rules appropriate within reasonable technological and economic constraints to make sure the air is safe to breathe. So Congress has said, EPA, you have the authority to regulate gases that come from these sources. You have to regulate those within the constraint of it has to be sort of economically and technologically feasible, and I said something like that. Has to be technologically feasible and make people healthy, and it has to be healthy still too. Alright, so you got to balance those two goals. So Congress is passing off all that authority to the EPA. The EPA can now go and they can make rules. The rules the EPA makes, these are rules or regulations, have the force of law. They are basically making laws. The authority to make laws that have been delegated to them by Congress. So the EPA will look at the law passed by Congress and say, okay, guess what? We have now the power to make rules, which you can say are basically like laws, to regulate these gases and to take these things into account. So the EPA may say, all right, the healthy level of CO2 in the atmosphere is 400 parts per million. Making it so that we stay at that level would cost this much money, and it would require this technology. The EPA would then look at that and say, hey, that is both economically feasible and we have the technology to do it. So that is where we are going to establish the maximum level of CO2 in the atmosphere. The EPA could say, though, also 400 CO2 concentrations at 400 parts per million is the maximum safe level for humans. However, we don't have the technology right now to pull that off without causing massive disruptions to our life. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a plan that puts research into finding the technologies and trying to fast track some of the technologies that will allow us to have the technological feasibility to implement the 400 parts per million maximum CO2 limit. Does that make sense? Because they're the experts on deciding where it is. And so now you have this broad law. Congress obviously wants there to be an understanding of what the economic and technical limits are of establishing whatever is the maximum safe level of, say, CO2 in the atmosphere. However, Congress can't figure that out themselves. They send it to the EPA for the experts who can figure that out. The other reason Congress would, in this specific example, delegate out that authority to the EPA is the same reason why I said if you had a coal-fired power plant that was more than 75 years old and the EPA was saying we're shutting that down, you would all of a sudden be against clean air. If the Congress makes laws that are too specific, that spells things out too specifically, all of a sudden you have real winners and real losers who can then line up against or in favor of the law. If you have people that can tangibly look at a law and say, I am going to lose if this law passes, they will be highly motivated to beat you, and they might beat you. They might be able to stop the law, even if there's a lot of support behind it. However, if you pass a law where it's not clear who's going to win or lose, you can stifle some of that backlash to the law you create, so that people don't actually get really pissed off until the bureaucratic agency implements the law in the way that they believe Congress wanted them to implement it. So Congress didn't say coal-fired power plants older than 75 years old are getting shut down. If you owned a coal-fired power plant, you don't have any reason yet to oppose this law or to spend all your time and energy trying to defeat it. You may oppose it because you may worry that it will get your plant shut down, but you're not sure about that, so you're not going to throw all of your resources into doing that, into trying to defeat the law. Now, though, it is a law, and the EPA has brought down the hammer and says you're getting shut down, you're going to be mad. However, there's nothing you can do about it at this point, because the law has already been passed and the EPA has implemented the regulations. So it actually allows sometimes things to get done because Congress gets to say, I'm not responsible for anything. Right? Does that make sense? Of course it does. I'm so glad y'all all are getting this perfectly. Okay, so the one other thing about the clean air example, let's say Congress went through and specified all the pollutants that the EPA could regulate. What happens, as it has happened, 5 years, let's say, after the law is passed, we discover that there is a pollutant that we've been releasing into the atmosphere all this time that we did not know existed. And now we discovered it exists, and now it's terrible. And we realize, oh, the reason why 50% of cancer is caused by this one thing that we just learned about, that we just realized we're releasing into the atmosphere. We want to do something about that, right? Of course we do. Glad everybody said right. Now, Congress could pass a law that says the EPA now has the authority to regulate this specific, gas that we're releasing that's causing cancer. However, that could take a while. There's committees that will hear it, and there's going to be special interest groups that are going to oppose it, even though it causes cancer. There's going to be Congress people who support it, but also want to try and throw extra little bits into the law to, for their own little pet projects. There are going to be Congress people who are going to oppose the law simply because they're not the party in power. Think about it. Obama's in the White House. Republicans control the House and the Senate. Republicans may say, yeah, I know this is giving everybody cancer, but we're not going to pass anything because we don't want Obama to be able to say that he was able to solve this problem. So we're just going to let people get cancer until a Republican gets in the White House. They could say that. And very well the Democrats could say the same thing if the shoe was on the other foot. That's a lot of hassle. It could take a long time. People are dying. We don't want that, right? Right, good. So what Congress does in making these laws somewhat vague in this way is that it allows the EPA, in this case of the Clean Air Act, to respond to new threats or new things that need to be regulated that we might not have thought of originally. It allows the bureaucratic agencies to be efficient in responding to the changing conditions, changing knowledge, changing technologies as sort of society moves forward. When the Federal Communications Commission was created, there was not the internet. However, the FCC has been able to do some regulations with the internet because of the authority Congress has given it. It's good that it's been able to do that, because things would be bad if there wasn't some regulation of the internet. But there wouldn't be any regulation of the internet at all right now if Congress hadn't left open the question as to what exactly qualified as something the FCC could regulate at the interpretation of the FCC. Hope that makes sense. I know it doesn't. Well, I don't know it doesn't. No, it doesn't. The one last thing, there's lots in here that you should go through, but one other topic I really, really like is this merit and tenure. The book specifically talks about merit. It doesn't mention tenure as far as I remember, but they're two intertwined very much. Okay. Merit system, all right, is a government bureaucratic reform. It's a civil service reform, okay, wherein people are now hired for government jobs based upon their qualifications, not based upon who they know. Okay, this may seem obvious or weird. However, before the merit reform was implemented, people were routinely hired in the government based upon the spoils system, based upon, are you my friend? You may not know anything about this. However, let me give you a job, friend. Robert, you donated $20 million to my campaign. I need somebody to head up my handsome man laboratory. You're not exactly the handsomest man in the world. You don't know anything about being handsome. However, here's a job. I don't have the merit to pull that off. I don't have the degree, the education, or the looks to be the head of the department of handsome people. But I'm friends with somebody, and so they give me the job. Under the merit system, though, now Matt Damon is going to get that job as the director of the Department of Handsome because he actually knows something about being handsome. He's got a degree in handsomeness. He's had years of experience being handsome. He knows how to manage handsomeness. He's going to be able to run that department efficiently, whereas I would like the check, and that would be cool, but I wouldn't know what I was doing, and government would be very not efficient, right? Whereas Matt Damon, being an expert in the area, could then run the department very efficiently. The merit system helps do that, helps that happen, helps make sure that people, when they're hired for government positions, one, know what they're doing, have a reason to be there, right? So that's one. The second part is, and it's tied to my buying my handsome department position, it helps protect these people from political influence, all right? if I am getting a job because I deserve it, I am not necessarily beholden to some political person or special interest group, things like that. If I get hired at the Department of Energy to give out grants to solar power plant companies or something, a senator can't come to my door and say, hey, Robert, you like your job? I helped you get that. I want you to give $50 million to my friend in the solar energy industry. I can go, listen, I got this job because I am qualified for it. That's the way things work. Your friend is not worthy of that, $50 million? So your friend's not getting it, and you can go, you know what, to yourself. Yeah, that's right. I went there. To a senator. Mm-hmm. Okay, so I'm protected from political influence, and all these positions can't be hired based upon solely political issues or considerations. All right. Well, the other part of this, or another part of this, and it's also tied in with this thing called tenure. Tenure reform, people may have heard of the word tenure, especially with university positions, professors, things like that. Professors, after a certain number of years, they go up for tenure. If they get tenure, then it's very, very hard to fire them. All right? Government employees have tenure. Certain other professions have some type of tenure at the very least. Some teachers have tenure. A lot of people don't like tenure because they don't think that somebody should be able, like a government employee should, they think that tenure protects bad government employees from being fired. Okay? But here's the argument for tenure that doesn't often get any play. If you're protected from being fired, you are less susceptible to political influence. And if you're a government bureaucrat, you are in a position to wield a crap ton of power to make very important decisions that affect people's lives. You want to make sure that person is not going to be easily swayed by political or other economic considerations. As the person who does the grants at the Department of Energy for solar power or whatever, from the hypothetical before, I got hired maybe based upon my merit, but if I don't have tenure, if I don't have some job guarantees, then I know when the senator comes down to my office, if I refuse his request, quote-unquote request, I could find myself fired a little bit later. No reason. They wouldn't give any justification for firing me. They'd just say you're fired. We all know I would have been fired because I didn't, I wasn't corrupt and give the senator's friend all that money. But that would be legal. Tenure reform stops that from happening. It helps protect government bureaucrats from this political influence, from corruption, and allows them to use their own independent expert judgment to run the government agency, to make decisions on behalf of the bureaucratic agencies in ways that are most efficient and do the most good for the people. Sometimes, of course, they're wrong, but they're wrong in good faith, if that makes sense. They're wrong trying to be right. We all make mistakes sometimes. But anyway, that's that. The two go hand in hand, merit and tenure reform. So merit means you have to be competent to get hired. You have to have qualifications. You have to have a degree, work experience, things like that to get hired at a job. So you can't just be giving jobs to your friends in the government. And tenure reform then complements that after you get the job. So you got the job because you deserve it. But now with tenure reform, you get to keep the job. because you're doing the job, and not because you're being corrupt. If you didn't have job security, you'd be much more likely to accept bribes or to do what politically powerful people want you to do or tell you to do. With tenure reform, the government needs to make a case as to why you get fired. They have to be able to prove you no longer deserve this job because you suck at it. Not bowing down to a senator's political corrupt demands is not worthy of being fired over. And so you can, if you're tenured, prevent that. Okay. Make sure you read the chapter carefully before you do the quiz. Good night and good luck. I hope the other video is finally uploaded, and I'll get this thing started very soon uploading. We'll do the thing. All right.